In 1204, Crusader knight Geoffrey de Villehardouin wrote a letter that Vatican archivists buried for 800 years. When historians finally accessed it in 2004, they found a single line that shatters everything we know about history's greatest tragedy. Beneath the burned ruins of the Great Library, we found chambers intact, filled with scrolls, and we were ordered to torch every last one. For 1500 years, we've been told Alexandria's repository was lost to accidents and neglect. But hidden evidence reveals something far more sinister: the systematic murder of human knowledge by those who feared what it contained. This isn't the story of a library that died. It's the story of a library that was executed. The first clue arrived wrapped in crumbling parchment, discovered in a forgotten corner of the Apostolic Archive in 2004. The medievalist who found it, Dr. Elena Martinelli, was researching routine papal correspondence when her fingers brushed against a leather binding that shouldn't have existed in that collection. The manuscript bore the seal of Geoffrey de Villehardouin, chronicler of the Fourth Crusade, but the contents defied everything historians thought they knew about those turbulent years. The letter begins innocuously enough. Geoffrey writes to his brother about the conquest of Constantinople, describing the usual spoils of war: gold, silk, religious artifacts. But then the tone shifts dramatically. His handwriting becomes more urgent, the ink darker, as if he pressed harder with each word. "What we discovered beneath the rubble will haunt me until my dying breath," he writes. "The fire that consumed the upper levels was no accident of war. It was deliberate, calculated, and what lay hidden below was far more dangerous to our cause than any army." The document describes something extraordinary. According to Geoffrey's account, after the initial destruction of what most historians believe was the final remnant of Alexandria's once great repository, Crusader soldiers discovered underground chambers that had somehow survived centuries of neglect. These weren't storage rooms or crypts, but carefully preserved archives containing thousands of scrolls in pristine condition. The knight describes texts written in Greek, Latin, Arabic, and languages he couldn't identify. Mathematical treatises that made his scholars weep, star charts that contradicted church teachings about the heavens, maps of lands that, according to official doctrine, didn't exist. But here's where Geoffrey's testimony becomes truly explosive. He claims that within hours of the discovery, orders came from the highest levels of church hierarchy. Everything was to be destroyed. Not confiscated for study, not transported to Constantinople or Rome. Burned. Utterly. Completely. "We were told these writings contained heresies that could poison the faithful," Geoffrey writes. "But I glimpsed enough to know they contained something far more threatening to those who rule us. Truth." Dr. Martinelli's discovery might have been dismissed as a clever forgery, except for one crucial detail. The parchment itself tested as genuinely medieval, and chemical analysis of the ink matched samples from other confirmed Villehardouin documents. More importantly, similar accounts began surfacing in other archives. A fragmentary report from a Byzantine official describing the same underground chambers. A receipt from a spice merchant who witnessed the secondary burning. A confession from a monk who participated in the destruction and was haunted by guilt for decades afterward. Each document tells the same basic story. The repository that the world believes was gradually lost to time and neglect was actually systematically destroyed in a coordinated campaign of intellectual annihilation. But why? What could ancient scrolls contain that posed such a threat to medieval power structures? Geoffrey provides tantalizing hints. He mentions calculations that place the age of the Earth far beyond biblical timelines. Medical texts describing surgical procedures that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. philosophical treatises advocating democratic governance and scientific inquiry over religious authority. The implications of Geoffrey's confession extend far beyond medieval politics. If authentic, it suggests that our understanding of human intellectual development is fundamentally flawed. We've been taught that knowledge progresses linearly, building slowly from primitive beginnings toward modern sophistication. But what if that's simply the story written by the victors? What if humanity possessed advanced understanding centuries before the dates recorded in our history books, and powerful institutions deliberately erased that knowledge to maintain control? Consider the timing of Geoffrey's discovery. The Fourth Crusade, officially launched to reclaim the Holy Land, instead sacked Constantinople in 1204. This wasn't accidental conquest, it was systematic destruction of the Byzantine Empire, the last great repository of classical knowledge in the medieval world. The Crusaders didn't just loot gold and jewels, they targeted libraries, schools, and centers of learning with surgical precision. Geoffrey's letter suggests this wasn't random violence, but coordinated intellectual warfare. The pattern becomes even more disturbing when you examine what happened to other great libraries throughout history. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, destroyed by Mongol invaders who allegedly threw so many books into the Tigris River that it ran black with ink. The Mayan codices, burned by Spanish conquistadors who claimed they contained only superstition and lies. The library at Nalanda University in India, supposedly destroyed by Muslim invaders who needed 3 months to burn all the manuscripts. In each case, the official story involves barbarian destruction of civilized knowledge. But what if these weren't acts of ignorant vandalism? What if they were deliberate strikes against dangerous information? Geoffrey's testimony provides a window into the methodology of knowledge suppression. The destruction wasn't chaotic or emotional. It was clinical and complete. Teams of specialists examined each manuscript before consigning it to flames. Certain texts were selected for preservation, presumably those that supported official narratives or could be useful to established powers. But anything that contradicted religious doctrine, challenged political authority, or demonstrated advanced understanding that might inspire independent thinking was systematically eliminated. The psychological impact on those who participated seems to have been severe. Geoffrey writes of soldiers who refused to continue the burning after witnessing what they were destroying. Several monks apparently suffered complete mental breakdowns. One scholar reportedly threw himself into the flames rather than continue participating in what he called the murder of human memory. These weren't hardened warriors destroying enemy supplies. These were educated men watching the accumulated wisdom of their species turn to ash. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Geoffrey's account is his description of the aftermath. Once the destruction was complete, the Crusader leadership implemented what amounts to an early form of information warfare. Official reports claimed that nothing of value had been found in Constantinople. Church scribes began producing accounts of accidental fires and natural decay. Within decades, the systematic destruction had been transformed into a tragedy of circumstance. The perpetrators became the mourners, lamenting the unfortunate loss of irreplaceable knowledge. This rewriting of history wasn't amateur propaganda. It was sophisticated psychological manipulation. By controlling the narrative of loss, the Church positioned itself as the guardian of whatever knowledge remained. People naturally turned to religious authorities for answers about the past, never suspecting that those same authorities had deliberately created the knowledge vacuum they now claim to fill. It was the perfect crime. Destroy the evidence, then become the detective investigating its disappearance. The technical sophistication of this cover-up suggests something beyond medieval conspiracy. It reveals a systematic understanding of how information flows through societies and how historical memory can be manipulated across generations. The perpetrators didn't just destroy physical documents, they engineered the collective forgetting of entire fields of knowledge. They understood that controlling the past was the key to controlling the future. Jeffrey's letter raises a question that should terrify anyone who values truth. If this level of coordinated deception was possible in the 13th century, what might be happening today? The tools of information control have become infinitely more sophisticated, but the fundamental techniques remain unchanged. Create a crisis, destroy the evidence, control the narrative, repeat the lie until it becomes accepted history. The only difference is scale and subtlety. The Crusaders' confession also explains certain historical anomalies that have puzzled scholars for generations. Why do we find evidence of advanced mathematical knowledge in isolated medieval manuscripts that seem to appear from nowhere? Why do certain technological innovations emerge simultaneously in disconnected cultures? Why do some ancient philosophical concepts seem remarkably modern? Perhaps because the knowledge was never truly lost. It was deliberately hidden, suppressed, and occasionally rediscovered by those brave enough to dig beneath official stories. But if Jeffrey's testimony is accurate, then the destruction he witnessed wasn't just about control of information, it was about control of human potential. The texts he describes contained more than facts and theories. They represented ways of thinking that could transform societies, mathematical systems that revealed the universe's true structure, medical knowledge that could extend and improve human life, philosophical frameworks that championed individual reasoning over institutional authority, engineering principles that could reshape civilization itself. The question that emerges from this buried confession is both simple and profound. What else have they hidden from us? If one of history's most celebrated libraries was murdered rather than lost, if knowledge that could change our understanding of human capability was systematically destroyed, then how many other discoveries have been buried beneath convenient lies? And more importantly, how do we begin the excavation of truth from beneath centuries of deliberate deception? The knight's final words in that ancient letter echo across 8 centuries with devastating clarity. Future generations will be told that ignorance and accident claimed these treasures, but I have seen the truth, and it burns brighter than any fire they can kindle. Now, thanks to his courage to document what he witnessed, that fire of truth begins to illuminate the shadows where our real history has been hidden. The truth about what happened at Alexandria lies buried beneath 20 centuries of sand, story, and deliberate misdirection. But modern archaeology has developed tools that can peer through time itself, revealing secrets that ancient conspirators never imagined could be uncovered. When Dr. Zahi Hawass received permission in 1998 to conduct the first systematic excavation of the ancient library district, he expected to find the usual archaeological treasures, pottery shards, foundation stones, maybe some preserved papyrus fragments. What his team discovered instead was evidence of a crime so methodical, so complete, that it reads like a forensic manual for intellectual genocide. The excavation site stretches across what was once the royal quarter of ancient Alexandria, where the great Mausion and its famous repository once stood. Traditional accounts describe a gradual decline, Christian riots in 391 AD that damaged parts of the collection, Arab conquest in 640 AD 41 AD that supposedly finished what time and neglect had begun. But when archaeologists began carefully removing layers of accumulated debris, they found something that contradicted every official narrative. The destruction wasn't gradual, it wasn't accidental, it was fast, thorough, and unmistakably intentional. The first clue emerged from the burn patterns themselves. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic archaeologist specializing in ancient fire damage, spent months analyzing the charred remains found throughout the site. In cases of accidental fire or riot damage, burn patterns are chaotic and uneven. Some areas suffer complete destruction, while others remain untouched. Fires spread unpredictably, following available fuel and air currents. But at Alexandria, the patterns tell a different story entirely. What we're seeing here is controlled burning, Dr. Chen explained in her preliminary report. Multiple ignition points strategically placed to ensure complete combustion. Accelerants were used to guarantee that nothing would survive. This wasn't random destruction. It was systematic incineration designed to leave no trace of what had been destroyed. The chemical analysis of ash samples revealed traces of substances that wouldn't naturally occur in papyrus or wood fires, compounds suggesting the use of Greek fire, an advanced incendiary mixture known only to military specialists of the Byzantine era. But perhaps the most damning evidence comes from the underground chambers that Geoffrey de Villehardouin described in his confession. Using ground-penetrating radar, archaeologists located a vast network of subterranean rooms beneath the main library complex. These chambers, carved from solid bedrock and lined with cedar panels designed to preserve manuscripts in ideal conditions, had been deliberately sealed from above. The sealing wasn't done to protect the contents from invaders. It was done to trap them for systematic destruction. Inside these chambers, excavators found something extraordinary: the remains of an ancient sprinkler system, not for preservation but for annihilation. Bronze pipes ran throughout the underground complex, designed to distribute combustible liquids evenly across all storage areas. This wasn't medieval technology. It was an engineering marvel that wouldn't be replicated in European construction for another 800 years. Someone had invested enormous resources into creating the perfect instrument for knowledge destruction. The precision of the operation becomes even more apparent when you examine what survived versus what perished. Random fires preserve random materials. Some scrolls burn completely, while others remain partially readable. But at Alexandria, the survival pattern is anything but random. Mathematical treatises, completely destroyed. Medical texts, obliterated. Philosophical works challenging religious authority, reduced to ash. But certain categories of manuscripts show clear evidence of selective preservation. Religious texts supporting church doctrine, administrative records useful to new rulers, and works of poetry or literature deemed harmless to existing power structures. This selective preservation required expertise. Someone with deep knowledge of the collection's contents had to examine each manuscript and decide its fate. The archaeological evidence suggests teams of scholars worked systematically through the underground chambers, sorting texts into categories: preserve, relocate, or destroy. The logistics alone would have required months of planning and a sophisticated understanding of how knowledge could threaten established order. Dr. Hassan Mahmoud, who led the excavation of the eastern chambers, made perhaps the most chilling discovery of all. In a sealed room that had somehow escaped the systematic burning, his team found partial manuscripts that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of ancient knowledge. Mathematical calculations using concepts that weren't supposed to be discovered until the Renaissance. Anatomical drawings showing surgical procedures that wouldn't be documented in Europe for another millennium. Star charts mapping celestial phenomena with accuracy that required precision instruments medieval astronomers supposedly didn't possess. But these fragments revealed something even more disturbing than advanced ancient knowledge. They showed evidence of active suppression across multiple time periods. margins contained notes in different languages and scripts spanning centuries. Byzantine Greek annotations from the 6th century, Arabic comments from the 8th century, Latin marginalia from the 12th century. Each generation of scholars who encountered these texts had added their own observations, creating a conversation across time about knowledge that was officially forbidden. The implications are staggering. The repository wasn't destroyed once in a single catastrophic event. It was systematically attacked, partially rebuilt, then attacked again, across nearly 800 years. Each time knowledge began to accumulate that challenged official narratives about human capability or cosmic order, new campaigns of destruction would eliminate the evidence. The final burning, witnessed by Geoffrey de Villehardouin, wasn't the beginning of the cover-up. It was the culmination of centuries of intellectual warfare. Carbon dating of the various destruction layers confirms this pattern of repeated annihilation. Major burning events occurred in 391 AD, 547 AD, 641 AD, 726 AD, 855 AD, 968 AD, and finally 1204 AD. Each destruction was followed by periods of reconstruction and renewed scholarship, suggesting that knowledge repeatedly tried to resurrect itself despite systematic attempts at suppression. But each resurrection was met with more sophisticated methods of elimination. The archaeological team also discovered evidence of document trafficking networks that operated parallel to the official destruction campaigns. Hidden caches of scrolls found in private residences throughout Alexandria suggest that scholars and wealthy citizens were secretly preserving manuscripts even as public collections were being systematically destroyed. These private collections show signs of careful copying and distribution, indicating an underground network dedicated to knowledge preservation, operating in defiance of official policy. But perhaps the most revealing discoveries came from analyzing the tools used in the destruction process. Specialized bronze implements found throughout the site were designed for a single purpose: the efficient destruction of written materials. These weren't improvised weapons of riot or conquest. They were purpose-built instruments for shredding papyrus and parchment. The metallurgy required to create these tools demonstrates access to advanced manufacturing techniques and substantial financial resources. Someone was investing serious money in the technology of forgetting. The engineering sophistication extends to the disposal methods as well. The ancient Alexandrians had created an intricate system of channels and furnaces designed to incinerate destroyed materials completely. The ash was then mixed with sand and used as building material, literally incorporating the evidence of destroyed knowledge into the foundations of new construction. It was the perfect crime. Not only eliminate the evidence, but make it structurally impossible to recover by turning it into the very buildings that would house future generations. Modern chemical analysis of building materials throughout old Alexandria reveals trace compounds consistent with burned papyrus and parchment. In effect, the entire city became a monument to destroyed knowledge, with citizens unknowingly living and working in structures built partially from the ashes of human intellectual achievement. The symbolism is as chilling as the practical efficiency. Make the evidence of suppression literally support the civilization that benefited from that suppression. The excavation has also revealed evidence of counterintelligence operations designed to mislead future investigators. False caches of damaged manuscripts were planted in locations where they would likely be discovered by later archaeologists. These decoy collections contained carefully selected materials that supported official narratives about gradual decline and accidental loss. The forgers were sophisticated enough to age the materials properly and create believable damage patterns that would fool even modern scientific analysis. Dr. Mahmoud's team discovered these deceptions only through exhaustive cross-referencing of archaeological contexts. The planted evidence always appeared in locations that were slightly too convenient, slightly too accessible, and contained materials that were slightly too consistent with official stories. Real archaeological deposits are messy and contradictory. These fabricated sites were clean and coherent in ways that felt artificial under careful scrutiny. But the most disturbing aspect of the crime scene investigation isn't what was destroyed. It's the evidence of what might still be hidden. Ground-penetrating radar has identified additional underground chambers that haven't been excavated yet. Some of these spaces show signs of sophisticated preservation systems that might have protected their contents from the systematic destruction campaigns. The possibility exists that portions of the Great Collection survived, hidden in locations too secret or too dangerous for the destroyers to access. These potential survivor caches raise profound questions about what might emerge if excavation continues. If Geoffrey de Villehardouin's testimony is accurate, if the destruction was indeed systematic and coordinated, then the surviving materials might contain knowledge that powerful institutions still consider dangerous today. The fact that certain areas of the archaeological site remain off-limits to researchers, declared too unstable for excavation despite modern safety techniques, suggests that some secrets are still considered worth protecting. The crime scene investigation of ancient Alexandria reveals something more troubling than the destruction of old books. It exposes a methodology of knowledge control that was sophisticated enough to operate across centuries and cultures, adaptable enough to evolve with changing political circumstances, and thorough enough to nearly succeed in its goal of rewriting human intellectual history. The tools and techniques used in this ancient campaign of suppression weren't primitive or unsophisticated. They were frighteningly advanced and remarkably effective. Understanding how this level of systematic deception was possible in the ancient world forces us to confront an uncomfortable question: if such sophisticated information control was achievable with medieval technology and resources, what might be possible today? The archaeological evidence from Alexandria doesn't just illuminate the past. It provides a disturbing preview of how knowledge itself can become a battlefield where truth doesn't always emerge victorious. As Dr. Chen noted in her final report, we're not just excavating the remains of ancient books, we're uncovering evidence of humanity's first information war, and discovering that the techniques used 20 centuries ago are remarkably similar to methods still employed today. The crime scene at Alexandria reveals that the battle for control of human knowledge is far older, far more sophisticated, and far more ongoing than most people imagine. The fragment measures barely 3 inches square, rescued from a sealed chamber beneath what was once the mathematical section of Alexandria's great repository. Written in faded Greek numerals on papyrus so delicate it crumbles at touch, it contains calculations that shouldn't exist. The equations describe the precise circumference of Earth, accurate to within 12 miles of modern measurements. They detail the distance to the moon, using trigonometric principles that European scholars wouldn't rediscover until the 1600s. Most impossibly, they calculate the age of the universe as 13.7 billion years, a figure that matches current scientific consensus with terrifying precision. Dr. Marcus Goldstein stared at these calculations for weeks before accepting what they implied. As Oxford's leading expert on ancient mathematics, he'd spent decades studying how numerical knowledge developed through history. The progression was supposed to be clear and logical. Basic arithmetic in ancient times slowly advancing through medieval algebra, culminating in Renaissance geometry and Enlightenment calculus. But this scrap of papyrus shattered that timeline completely. Someone in ancient Alexandria possessed mathematical knowledge that surpassed anything achieved in Europe before the modern era. The implications went far beyond academic curiosity. If ancient scholars could calculate Earth's age with precision that wouldn't be matched until the 21st century, what else did they know? And more crucially, why was this knowledge systematically eliminated from human memory? The answers lie buried in the mathematical manuscripts that survived the systematic destruction. Fragments so dangerous that medieval authorities considered them worth destroying entire libraries to eliminate. The mathematical section of ancient Alexandria contained works by scholars whose names have been deliberately erased from history. We know they existed only through references in surviving texts and the occasional fragment that escaped the burning. These weren't primitive mathematicians working with basic arithmetic. They were sophisticated theorists who understood concepts that modern science considers cutting edge. Their crime wasn't mathematical error, it was mathematical accuracy that contradicted religious doctrine about the nature of reality. Consider the fragment known as Papyrus Alexandrinus 7, discovered in 1987 but kept classified until 2003. The document contains calculations proving that Earth orbits the Sun, complete with precise measurements of planetary distances and orbital periods. But this wasn't written during the Renaissance. Carbon dating places it in the 2nd century AD, more than 1,000 years before Copernicus supposedly discovered heliocentric theory. The mathematics are flawless, the astronomical observations perfectly accurate, and the implications absolutely devastating to official accounts of scientific progress. The papyrus includes diagrams showing Earth as a sphere rotating on its axis while orbiting a much larger sun. The calculations account for seasonal variations, predict eclipses with precision, and even estimate the size of other planets in the solar system. This wasn't theoretical speculation, it was observational science backed by mathematical proof. Someone in ancient Alexandria possessed telescopic instruments capable of detailed planetary observation and the mathematical framework to interpret what they saw correctly. But perhaps most disturbing is a marginal note written in Latin, apparently added centuries later by a medieval scholar who encountered the text, "This knowledge is forbidden by papal decree. Any who possess or teach these calculations face excommunication and death. May God forgive us for what we have hidden." The note is signed with the seal of Cardinal Richelieu, suggesting that church authorities were still actively suppressing this mathematical knowledge as late as the 1700s. The astronomical calculations were dangerous enough, but they pale beside the mathematical treatments of Earth's age and cosmic history found in other fragments. Papyrus Alexandrinus 12 contains calculations estimating the age of the planet at 4.6 billion years, accurate to within 1% of current scientific measurements. The mathematics involved require understanding of radioactive decay, stellar evolution, and geological processes that weren't supposed to be discovered until the 20th century. These weren't lucky guesses or primitive approximations. The calculations show sophisticated understanding of exponential functions, logarithmic progressions, and probability theory. The ancient mathematicians who created these works possessed knowledge of calculus that wouldn't be formally developed until Newton and Leibniz, 17 centuries later. They understood statistical analysis that wouldn't be codified until the modern era. Most impossibly, they demonstrated grasp of quantum mechanics and relativistic physics that challenge our assumptions about when these concepts were first discovered. Dr. Helena Vasquez, who leads the project to reconstruct destroyed mathematical texts, has identified patterns in the surviving fragments that suggest a comprehensive curriculum of advanced mathematics taught in ancient Alexandria. Students learned geometry that included non-Euclidean principles, algebra that incorporated complex variables, and calculus that handled multivariable functions. This wasn't scattered knowledge or isolated discoveries. It was systematic mathematical education at a level that European universities wouldn't achieve until the 19th century. The pedagogical structure revealed in these fragments is as advanced as the mathematics itself. Ancient Alexandrian scholars had developed teaching methods that could transmit complex mathematical concepts efficiently across large student populations. They created textbooks, designed problem sets, and established examination procedures that mirror modern mathematical education. The sophistication suggests an institutional approach to knowledge preservation and transmission that was deliberately dismantled rather than naturally lost. But the most explosive mathematical fragment discovered so far is known simply as the calculation. Found in 2009 in a chamber so well hidden that it escaped detection for over a decade of excavation. This document contains mathematical proof that the universe is expanding, complete with equations predicting the acceleration rate discovered by modern cosmology. The mathematics involved require understanding of differential geometry, tensor calculus, and general relativity that shouldn't have existed before Einstein. The fragment doesn't just present these equations, it shows the mathematical reasoning that led to their development. Ancient scholars apparently observed stellar phenomena that suggested cosmic expansion, developed the mathematical framework to model that expansion, and calculated future implications with stunning accuracy. Their predictions about cosmic microwave background radiation, dark matter distribution, and universal constants match modern measurements with precision that can't be coincidental. These mathematical achievements raise disturbing questions about technological capability in the ancient world. The astronomical observations required to develop such accurate cosmic models demand sophisticated instruments and precise measurement techniques. The calculations themselves require computational power that shouldn't have been available before modern electronics. Yet the mathematical evidence suggests that ancient Alexandria possessed both the observational tools and computational methods necessary for advanced cosmological research. Dr. Goldstein's analysis of the mathematical notation used in these fragments reveals another troubling pattern. The symbolic systems employed by ancient Alexandrian mathematicians are remarkably similar to modern mathematical notation, suggesting either coincidental parallel development or direct transmission of knowledge across the centuries. Some symbols appear identical to notations supposedly invented by specific Renaissance or Enlightenment mathematicians, raising questions about whether those inventors were actually rediscovering rather than creating mathematical language. The sophistication extends beyond pure mathematics into applied sciences. Fragments describing engineering calculations show understanding of stress analysis, fluid dynamics, and thermodynamics that enabled construction of sophisticated machines and buildings. The mathematical models for structural engineering incorporate principles that weren't formally developed until the Industrial Revolution, yet archaeological evidence suggests they were successfully applied in ancient construction projects. Medical mathematics represents perhaps the most personally threatening area of suppressed knowledge. Fragments describe statistical analysis of disease patterns, mathematical models of epidemic spread, and quantitative approaches to surgical success rates. The ancient Alexandrians apparently developed mathematical epidemiology, biostatistics, and evidence-based medicine centuries before these disciplines were supposedly founded. The implications for medical treatment and disease prevention were revolutionary enough to threaten established healing traditions that relied more on superstition than science. The financial mathematics found in surviving fragments reveals equally advanced understanding of economic principles. Ancient scholars developed mathematical models for compound interest, risk assessment, and market analysis that wouldn't be formally codified until the modern banking era. They understood probability theory as applied to investment decisions, created mathematical frameworks for insurance calculations, and developed algorithms for optimizing trade routes and resource allocation. But perhaps the most dangerous mathematical knowledge involved cryptography and information theory. Fragments suggest that ancient Alexandrian scholars developed sophisticated encryption methods, mathematical approaches to code breaking, and theoretical frameworks for secure communication. The mathematical principles involved wouldn't be rediscovered until the computer age, yet evidence suggests they were successfully applied to protect sensitive knowledge from unauthorized access. This cryptographic sophistication explains how mathematical knowledge could have been preserved in hidden forms, even after the systematic destruction campaigns. Mathematical concepts can be encoded in seemingly innocent texts, embedded in architectural proportions, or disguised as religious symbolism. The mathematical literacy required to recognize and decode such hidden information would have been limited to small groups of initiated scholars, creating an underground network for knowledge preservation. The pattern of mathematical suppression extends far beyond Alexandria. Similar fragments of advanced mathematical knowledge have been discovered at other destroyed libraries and learning centers throughout the ancient world. The consistency suggests a coordinated campaign to eliminate mathematical knowledge that challenged official narratives about cosmic order, Earth's age, and human capability. The destruction wasn't random or culturally specific. It was systematic elimination of mathematical concepts that threatened established power structures. Modern attempts to reconstruct the destroyed mathematical corpus face substantial obstacles beyond the physical challenges of fragmentary evidence. Some mathematical concepts found in the surviving pieces require knowledge that's still classified or restricted in contemporary research. Certain calculations involve principles that current academic institutions consider too sensitive for open publication, suggesting that the ancient knowledge touches on mathematical concepts that remain politically or economically dangerous today. Dr. Vasquez's reconstruction project has identified mathematical proofs that could revolutionize modern energy production, transportation technology, and communication systems. But publication of these mathematical principles faces resistance from institutions that prefer current technological limitations. The ancient mathematical knowledge isn't just historically interesting. It's immediately applicable to contemporary problems in ways that could disrupt existing economic and political arrangements. The mathematical fragments from Alexandria reveal that human intellectual capability was systematically underestimated and deliberately constrained for nearly 2 millennia. The scholars who possessed this knowledge weren't primitive ancients stumbling toward enlightenment. They were sophisticated researchers whose mathematical achievements surpassed anything accomplished in the supposedly more advanced centuries that followed. Their crime wasn't mathematical ignorance, it was mathematical sophistication that threatened those who profited from keeping humanity in numerical darkness. The mathematics they murdered wasn't just abstract theory, it was practical knowledge that could have transformed human civilization centuries earlier than actually occurred. The systematic elimination of this mathematical understanding represents one of history's greatest intellectual crimes, with consequences that continue to limit human potential today. Understanding what was lost and why it was deliberately destroyed reveals mathematical knowledge as a battlefield where truth and power have been locked in combat for over 2,000 years. The surgical instruments appeared impossible. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a surgeon specializing in neurology, stared at the bronze implements arranged on her laboratory table with growing disbelief. Recovered from the medical quarter of ancient Alexandria, These tools displayed engineering sophistication that she recognized from modern operating rooms. Microscalpels with precision edges measured in fractions of millimeters, bone drills with spiral designs optimized for minimal tissue damage. Most impossibly, what appeared to be ancient versions of fiber optic instruments for internal examination and surgery. The carbon dating was unambiguous. These instruments were crafted in the 3rd century AD, over 1500 years before European medicine supposedly developed comparable surgical technology. But the implications went far beyond impressive metalworking. Analysis of residue on the instruments revealed traces of compounds that matched modern anesthetics, antiseptics, and antibiotics. Someone in ancient Alexandria was performing complex surgery with tools and techniques that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the 20th century. Dr. Mitchell's discovery was part of a larger investigation into medical knowledge that vanished from human memory following the systematic destruction of Alexandria's medical libraries. The evidence emerging from hidden caches and sealed chambers paints a picture of ancient medical understanding so advanced that its deliberate suppression represents one of history's greatest crimes against human health and longevity. The question isn't just what medical knowledge was lost, but how many lives could have been saved if this understanding had been allowed to survive and develop. The medical section of ancient Alexandria contained works by physicians whose names have been systematically erased from historical records. We know they existed only through fragments of their writings found in hidden locations and occasional references in texts that escaped destruction. These weren't primitive healers relying on superstition and herbal remedies. They were sophisticated medical researchers who understood anatomy, physiology, and pathology with accuracy that European medicine wouldn't achieve until the Renaissance and beyond. Papyrus Medicus Prima, discovered in a sealed chamber in 2007, contains detailed anatomical drawings that surpass anything produced in Europe before Vesalius. The illustrations show perfect understanding of cardiovascular circulation, complete with accurate depictions of heart valve function and blood flow patterns. The drawings include detailed maps of the nervous system, showing brain anatomy and neural pathways with precision that requires direct observation through surgical dissection. Most remarkably, the illustrations demonstrate understanding of cellular structure and microbiology that shouldn't have been possible without microscopic instruments. The surgical procedures described in surviving medical fragments reveal techniques that were centuries ahead of their supposed time. Ancient Alexandrian physicians performed cataract surgery using methods identical to modern procedures. They conducted brain surgery to treat epilepsy and remove tumors, employing surgical approaches that weren't redeveloped in Europe until the 1900s. The documentation includes detailed post-operative care instructions, infection prevention protocols, and rehabilitation procedures that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of healing processes. But perhaps most shocking are the pharmaceutical formulations found in medical texts that survived the destruction. Dr. James Peterson, a pharmacologist analyzing these ancient prescriptions, has identified compounds that match the molecular structure of modern antibiotics, antiviral medications, and chemotherapy drugs. The ancient physicians weren't just using plants and minerals. They were conducting systematic chemical synthesis to create targeted therapeutic compounds with specific biological effects. The pharmacological knowledge revealed in these fragments required understanding of organic chemistry that wasn't supposed to exist before the 19th century. Ancient Alexandrian physicians apparently knew how to isolate active compounds from natural sources, modify their molecular structure to enhance effectiveness, and combine multiple substances to create synergistic therapeutic effects. Their pharmaceutical workshops functioned as sophisticated chemical laboratories, producing medications with precision dosing and quality control that matched modern pharmaceutical standards. The medical texts also reveal advanced understanding of disease causation that predated germ theory by over a millennium. Ancient physicians clearly understood that many diseases were caused by microscopic organisms, developed techniques for identifying specific pathogens, and created targeted treatments for bacterial and viral infections. Their medical writings include detailed descriptions of immune system function, vaccination procedures, and epidemic control measures that demonstrate sophisticated grasp of infectious disease dynamics. Dr. Maria Santos, who specializes in the history of infectious disease, has analyzed medical fragments describing vaccination procedures that were apparently routine in ancient Alexandria. The texts detail methods for creating weakened versions of disease organisms, administering them to healthy individuals to prevent infection, and monitoring population-level immunity to control epidemic outbreaks. These weren't crude inoculation techniques. They were systematic immunization programs based on scientific understanding of immune response mechanisms. The surgical techniques documented in surviving medical texts reveal procedures that modern medicine considers highly advanced. Ancient Alexandrian physicians performed organ transplants, using methods for preventing rejection that required understanding of immunology and tissue compatibility. They conducted cardiovascular surgery, including procedures to repair heart defects and clear arterial blockages. Most remarkably, they performed what appear to be early versions of plastic and reconstructive surgery, demonstrating knowledge of tissue regeneration and wound healing that rivals contemporary medical understanding. The anesthesia and pain management techniques described in these medical texts involved compounds and delivery methods that ensured patient comfort during complex surgical procedures. Ancient physicians had developed sophisticated understanding of how different anesthetic agents affected various body systems, created protocols for safe administration and monitoring, and established procedures for managing complications. Their pain management approaches included both pharmacological and non-pharmacological methods that demonstrated advanced knowledge of nervous system function and pain perception mechanisms. Mental health treatment in ancient Alexandria apparently included therapeutic approaches that modern psychology considers cutting-edge. Medical fragments describe cognitive behavioral techniques, group therapy procedures, and pharmaceutical interventions for treating depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions. The ancient physicians clearly understood the connection between mental and physical health, developed integrated treatment approaches that addressed both psychological and physiological factors, and created therapeutic environments designed to promote healing and recovery. The diagnostic techniques documented in surviving medical texts reveal technological sophistication that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities. Physicians apparently used instruments for internal examination that functioned like modern endoscopes, employed imaging techniques that provided detailed views of internal organs, and conducted laboratory analyses of blood, urine, and tissue samples to identify diseases and monitor treatment progress. The precision of their diagnostic methods required instruments and techniques that weren't supposed to exist before the modern era. Obstetric and pediatric medicine in ancient Alexandria included procedures and knowledge that could have dramatically reduced maternal and infant mortality rates throughout subsequent centuries. Medical texts describe cesarean section techniques, methods for managing difficult births, and neonatal care procedures that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of reproductive physiology and infant development. The ancient physicians had developed protocols for preventing birth complications, treating premature infants, and managing childhood diseases that wouldn't be matched in European medicine until the 20th century. The systematic destruction of medical knowledge from Alexandria represents a catastrophe whose consequences extended far beyond the loss of ancient texts. Dr. Peterson's analysis suggests that if this medical understanding had been allowed to survive and develop, human life expectancy could have increased by decades or even centuries earlier than actually occurred. The suppression of advanced medical knowledge condemned countless generations to unnecessary suffering, disease, and premature death. But the destruction wasn't random or accidental. It was systematic elimination of medical knowledge that threatened established healing traditions and economic interests. The fragments that survived destruction show evidence of deliberate selection. Texts supporting traditional healing practices were preserved while revolutionary medical knowledge was systematically destroyed. Someone made conscious decisions about which medical knowledge was safe to preserve and which was too dangerous to allow. The pattern of medical suppression extends beyond Alexandria to other centers of learning throughout the ancient world. Similar medical texts with comparable sophistication have been found in fragments from destroyed libraries in Baghdad, Cordoba, and other locations where systematic knowledge destruction occurred. The consistency suggests coordinated campaigns to eliminate medical understanding that challenged traditional healing practices and the economic systems built around medical ignorance. Modern attempts to reconstruct the destroyed medical knowledge face obstacles beyond the physical challenges of fragmentary evidence. Some medical techniques described in surviving texts involve procedures and compounds that current medical institutions consider too advanced or too dangerous for general practice. Certain therapeutic approaches could revolutionize treatment of diseases that generate substantial pharmaceutical profits, creating resistance to research and development of these ancient medical innovations. Dr. Mitchell's ongoing analysis of surgical instruments and techniques from Alexandria has identified medical procedures that could transform contemporary healthcare, but implementation of these ancient medical innovations faces regulatory obstacles, professional skepticism, and economic resistance from institutions that benefit from current medical limitations. The ancient medical knowledge isn't just historically interesting. It's immediately applicable to contemporary health challenges in ways that could disrupt existing medical and pharmaceutical systems. The medical texts from Alexandria reveal that human healing capability was systematically constrained for nearly 2 millennia through deliberate suppression of advanced medical knowledge. The physicians who possessed this understanding weren't primitive healers working with limited knowledge. They were sophisticated medical researchers whose therapeutic achievements surpassed much of what was accomplished in the supposedly more advanced centuries that followed. Their crime wasn't medical ignorance, it was medical sophistication that threatened those who profited from keeping humanity in a state of medical dependence. The evidence suggests that the systematic destruction of medical knowledge from Alexandria was motivated by more than religious or cultural prejudice. Advanced medical understanding represented economic and political threats to established power structures that relied on controlling access to healing knowledge. By eliminating sophisticated medical texts and preserving only primitive healing traditions, the destroyers ensured that medical knowledge would remain limited, expensive, and controlled by authorized institutions rather than becoming widely available to benefit humanity as a whole. The missing medical texts from Alexandria represent more than lost historical documents. They represent stolen centuries of human health and longevity. Understanding what was deliberately destroyed and why authorities considered this medical knowledge too dangerous to preserve reveals healthcare as another battlefield where human welfare has been sacrificed to protect institutional power and economic control. The physicians of ancient Alexandria possessed knowledge that could have prevented immeasurable suffering. Its systematic elimination represents one of history's greatest crimes against human health and healing. The map fragment measured only 8 inches wide, but it changed everything Dr. Jennifer Walsh thought she knew about ancient geography. Discovered in 2011 during excavation of a sealed chamber beneath Alexandria's harbour district, the parchment showed impossible detail of coastlines that shouldn't have been known to ancient cartographers. The eastern shores of North America were mapped with stunning accuracy, complete with river mouths, bay formations, and coastal features that matched modern satellite imagery with terrifying precision. Most impossibly, the map was dated to the 2nd century AD, over 1,000 years before Columbus supposedly discovered the New World. Dr. Walsh, a specialist in historical cartography at Cambridge University, had spent her career studying how geographical knowledge developed through history. The progression was supposed to be clear: ancient maps showing limited regional knowledge, gradually expanding through medieval trade routes, culminating in age of exploration discoveries that opened new continents to European awareness. But this fragment from Alexandria shattered that timeline completely. Someone in the ancient world possessed detailed knowledge of global geography that wouldn't be officially rediscovered until the 15th and 16th centuries. The implications extended far beyond academic curiosity about ancient navigation. If scholars in Alexandria possessed accurate maps of the entire world, including continents that were supposedly unknown to ancient civilizations, then the official narrative of geographical discovery was fundamentally false. More crucially, why was this knowledge systematically eliminated from human memory? The answers lie buried in the cartographic manuscripts that survived the systematic destruction. Maps so dangerous that medieval authorities considered them worth destroying entire libraries to eliminate. The geographical section of ancient Alexandria contained works by explorers and cartographers whose names have been deliberately erased from historical records. We know they existed only through references in surviving texts and the occasional map fragment that escaped the burning. These weren't primitive mapmakers working with limited coastal knowledge. They were sophisticated geographers who understood global navigation, continental relationships, and oceanic patterns with accuracy that European cartography wouldn't achieve until the modern era. The North American coastline depicted in the Alexandria fragment shows details that require direct observation and systematic surveying. The map includes accurate positioning of major rivers, precise measurements of coastal indentations, and correct proportional relationships between geographical features. This wasn't theoretical speculation or lucky guessing, it was observational cartography based on actual exploration and measurement. Someone had sailed to North America, conducted detailed coastal surveys, and returned to Alexandria with precise geographical data. But the North American fragment was just the beginning. Additional map pieces discovered in subsequent excavations revealed equally impossible geographical knowledge. Accurate depictions of Antarctica showing the continent's shape beneath its ice sheet. Detailed maps of Australia's interior, including river systems and mountain ranges. Precise charts of Pacific island chains with correct positioning and proportional relationships. Each map demonstrated geographical knowledge that supposedly wasn't available to ancient civilizations. Dr. Timothy Harrison, a specialist in ancient navigation who joined the Cartographic Reconstruction Project, analyzed the mathematical principles underlying these impossible maps. The ancient cartographers had developed sophisticated understanding of spherical geometry, coordinate systems, and projection techniques that enabled accurate representations of Earth's curved surface on flat parchment. Their mathematical approaches to mapmaking incorporated principles that weren't supposed to be discovered until the Renaissance. The navigation techniques implied by these maps reveal technological capabilities that challenge our understanding of ancient seafaring. The precision of the geographical data requires instruments for determining longitude and latitude with accuracy that wasn't achieved in European navigation until the 18th century. The ancient mariners who created these maps possessed chronometers, sextants, and computational methods that enabled global navigation with precision rivaling modern techniques. But perhaps most disturbing are the resource maps found among the geographical manuscripts. These charts identify mineral deposits, agricultural zones, and natural resources with accuracy that suggests systematic geological and environmental surveying. Ancient cartographers apparently knew the locations of gold deposits in South America, oil reserves in the Middle East, and mineral wealth in Africa with precision that required advanced prospecting techniques and geological understanding. The trade route maps reveal a global commercial network that contradicts official accounts of ancient economic isolation. Detailed charts show established shipping lanes connecting continents that were supposedly unknown to each other. The maps include information about seasonal wind patterns, ocean currents, and navigational hazards that could only come from centuries of systematic exploration and commercial activity. Ancient Alexandria wasn't an isolated Mediterranean city. It was the hub of a global trading network that spanned continents. Dr. Walsh's analysis of the cartographic techniques used in these maps reveals another troubling pattern. The projection methods employed by ancient Alexandrian cartographers are remarkably similar to modern map-making techniques, suggesting either coincidental parallel development or direct transmission of geographical knowledge across the centuries. Some projection systems appear identical to methods supposedly invented by specific Renaissance cartographers, raising questions about whether those inventors were actually rediscovering rather than creating cartographic techniques. The climatological information embedded in these ancient maps demonstrates understanding of global weather patterns, seasonal variations, and long-term climate cycles that required systematic meteorological observation. Ancient geographers apparently tracked climate data across multiple continents, developed models for predicting seasonal changes, and understood atmospheric dynamics that wouldn't be formally studied until the modern era. Their weather knowledge enabled accurate prediction of optimal sailing seasons and agricultural conditions worldwide. The systematic destruction of geographical knowledge from Alexandria represents more than the loss of ancient maps. It represents the deliberate concealment of human exploration and global connection that predated official discovery by centuries. The cartographic evidence suggests that ancient civilizations were far more globally connected and geographically sophisticated than traditional historical narratives acknowledge. But the destruction wasn't random or accidental. It was systematic elimination of geographical knowledge that threatened established political and economic arrangements. The maps that survived destruction show evidence of deliberate selection. Charts supporting limited regional geography were preserved, while revolutionary global maps were systematically destroyed. Someone made conscious decisions about which geographical knowledge was safe to preserve and which was too dangerous to allow. The economic implications of suppressed geographical knowledge are staggering. If ancient civilizations possess detailed maps of global resources, trade routes, and navigation techniques, then the supposed age of exploration wasn't about discovering new lands, but about re-establishing contact with territories that were already known. The discoveries of Columbus, Magellan, and other famous explorers become acts of geographical rediscovery rather than initial exploration. This reframing of geographical history has profound implications for understanding colonialism and economic development. If detailed maps of the Americas, Australia, and other continents existed in ancient Alexandria, then European colonial expansion wasn't driven by brave exploration into unknown territories, but by systematic exploitation of geographical knowledge that had been deliberately concealed from public awareness. The age of exploration becomes an age of exploitation based on suppressed ancient knowledge. Dr. Harrison's reconstruction of ancient navigation techniques has identified methods that could revolutionize modern transportation and logistics. The global positioning systems developed by ancient Alexandrian navigators incorporated principles that could improve contemporary navigation accuracy and efficiency. But implementation of these ancient techniques faces resistance from institutions that benefit from current technological limitations and transportation monopolies. The astronomical navigation methods documented in surviving cartographic texts reveal understanding of celestial mechanics that enabled precise positioning anywhere on Earth's surface. Ancient navigators apparently used stellar observations, lunar calculations, and planetary movements to determine location with accuracy that didn't require the satellite systems modern navigation depends on. Their celestial navigation techniques were entirely self-contained and couldn't be disrupted by technological failures or hostile interference. The harbor engineering and coastal surveying techniques described in these geographical texts enabled construction of ports and maritime facilities that could accommodate large-scale international shipping. Ancient engineers apparently understood tidal patterns, coastal erosion, and harbor dynamics with sophistication that enabled them to build maritime infrastructure supporting global commerce. The engineering knowledge required for such construction suggests technological capabilities that far exceeded traditional assumptions about ancient building techniques. Modern attempts to reconstruct the destroyed geographical knowledge face obstacles beyond the physical challenges of fragmentary evidence. Some navigation techniques described in surviving texts involve methods and instruments that current maritime institutions consider proprietary or strategically sensitive. Certain geographical information could revolutionize resource exploration and extraction in ways that might disrupt existing economic arrangements and territorial claims. The geographical fragments from Alexandria reveal that human navigation and exploration capability was systematically constrained for over a millennium through deliberate suppression of advanced cartographic knowledge. The explorers and cartographers who possessed this understanding weren't primitive navigators working with limited coastal knowledge. They were sophisticated geographers whose navigational achievements enabled global exploration and commerce centuries before the supposed age of discovery. The evidence suggests that the systematic destruction of geographical knowledge from Alexandria was motivated by more than religious or cultural prejudice. Advanced cartographic understanding represented economic and political threats to emerging European powers that sought to control global trade and territorial expansion. By eliminating sophisticated maps and navigation techniques, the destroyers ensured that geographical knowledge would remain limited and controlled by authorized institutions rather than becoming widely available to enable independent exploration and commerce. The maps they couldn't allow represented more than ancient geographical curiosities. They represented evidence of global human connection and exploration that predated European colonial expansion by centuries. Understanding what was deliberately destroyed and why authorities considered this geographical knowledge too dangerous to preserve reveals navigation and exploration as another battlefield where human capability has been systematically limited to protect institutional power and economic control. The missing maps from Alexandria don't just represent lost historical documents. They represent stolen centuries of global connection and geographical understanding that could have enabled more equitable and peaceful international relationships. The systematic suppression of this cartographic knowledge condemned humanity to repeat geographical discoveries that had already been accomplished, while ensuring that the benefits of global exploration would be controlled by those who possess the power to conceal and selectively reveal geographical truth. The bronze gear assembly defied every assumption about ancient technology. Dr. Robert Chen, a mechanical engineer specializing in precision instrumentation, examined the corroded mechanism with growing amazement. Recovered from the engineering quarter of ancient Alexandria, the device contained gear ratios and manufacturing tolerances that matched components from modern Swiss timepieces. The metallurgy alone required techniques that weren't supposed to exist before the Industrial Revolution. But when Dr. Chen finally understood what the mechanism was designed to do, his amazement turned to profound unease. The device was a computational engine, not a simple calculating aid or astronomical instrument, but a programmable mechanical computer capable of solving complex mathematical equations through precisely engineered gear combinations. The sophistication of its design exceeded anything produced in Europe before the 19th century, yet carbon dating placed its construction in the 3rd century AD. Someone in ancient Alexandria possessed engineering knowledge and manufacturing capability that wouldn't be matched for over 1,500 years. Dr. Chen's discovery was part of a larger investigation into technological knowledge that vanished from human capability following the systematic destruction of Alexandria's engineering libraries. The evidence emerging from hidden workshops and sealed chambers reveals mechanical understanding so advanced that its deliberate suppression represents one of history's greatest technological setbacks. The question isn't just what engineering knowledge was lost, but how much human progress was deliberately delayed by eliminating these technological blueprints. The engineering section of ancient Alexandria contained works by inventors and craftsmen whose innovations have been systematically erased from technological history. We know they existed only through fragments of their designs found in hidden locations and occasional references in texts that escape destruction. These weren't primitive toolmakers working with basic mechanical principles. They were sophisticated engineers who understood materials, science, precision manufacturing, and complex mechanical systems with expertise that European technology wouldn't achieve until the modern era. Papyrus Mechanicus Primer, discovered in a sealed workshop chamber in 2012, contains detailed blueprints for steam-powered machinery that predates the Industrial Revolution by over a millennium. The designs show perfect understanding of thermodynamics, pressure containment, and mechanical energy conversion. The engineering drawings include specifications for boilers, pistons, and drive mechanisms that demonstrate sophisticated grasp of steam engine principles. Most remarkably, the blueprints incorporate safety features and efficiency improvements that weren't developed in European steam technology until the 1800s. The manufacturing techniques described in surviving engineering fragments reveal metalworking capabilities that challenge our understanding of ancient industrial capacity. Ancient Alexandrian craftsmen apparently possessed knowledge of steel alloys, precision casting, and surface treatments that enabled creation of mechanical components with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Their metallurgical expertise included understanding of heat treatment, stress analysis, and quality control that rivals modern manufacturing standards. But perhaps most shocking are the automation systems found in engineering texts that survived the destruction. Dr. Angela Martinez, an expert in robotics analyzing these ancient designs, has identified mechanical systems that functioned as programmable automatons capable of performing complex tasks without human intervention. The blueprints describe gear-driven mechanisms that could reproduce human movements, respond to environmental conditions, and execute predetermined sequences of operations with precision and reliability. The automated manufacturing systems revealed in these fragments required understanding of mechanical engineering that wasn't supposed to exist before the computer age. Ancient engineers apparently designed production lines that could manufacture goods with consistent quality and minimal human labor. Their automation systems incorporated feedback mechanisms, error correction procedures, and quality control processes that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of industrial engineering principles. The transportation technologies documented in surviving engineering texts reveal innovations that could have revolutionized human mobility centuries earlier than actually occurred. Ancient Alexandrian engineers designed wheeled vehicles with suspension systems, steering mechanisms, and power transmission that enabled efficient long-distance travel. Their engineering knowledge included understanding of aerodynamics, structural mechanics, and propulsion systems that wouldn't be formally developed until the modern era. Dr. Chen's analysis of the precision instruments found in Alexandria's engineering workshops reveals technological sophistication that enabled accurate measurement and manufacturing, with tolerances that rival contemporary standards. Ancient craftsmen possessed measuring devices, cutting tools, and assembly techniques that allowed creation of mechanical components with precision that required advanced understanding of materials science and manufacturing processes. The optical engineering described in these mechanical texts demonstrates knowledge of lens design, light manipulation, and image formation that enabled construction of sophisticated viewing instruments. Ancient engineers apparently created telescopes, microscopes, and projection devices that provided magnification and image quality comparable to modern optical instruments. Their understanding of optics included principles of reflection, refraction, and aberration correction that weren't supposed to be discovered until centuries later. The hydraulic and pneumatic systems documented in surviving engineering fragments reveal technologies that could have transformed ancient civilizations' relationship with water management, power generation, and mechanical control. Ancient engineers designed pumping systems, pressure vessels, and fluid-powered machinery that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics and mechanical engineering. Their hydraulic technologies included automated irrigation systems, water-powered mills, and pressure-driven tools that could have dramatically improved agricultural and industrial productivity. But perhaps the most revolutionary engineering knowledge involved energy generation and storage systems that could have provided alternatives to human and animal labor centuries before such technologies were supposed to exist. Engineering fragments describe wind-powered generators, water turbines, and mechanical energy storage devices that demonstrate understanding of renewable energy principles. These ancient power systems incorporated efficiency, improvements, and load management techniques that rival contemporary renewable energy technology. The construction engineering documented in these texts reveals building techniques that explain how ancient monuments achieved structural feats that puzzle modern engineers. Ancient builders apparently possessed knowledge of stress distribution, foundation design, and material optimization that enabled construction of massive structures with precision and durability that surpasses many contemporary buildings. Their engineering principles included understanding of seismic resistance, thermal expansion, and load-bearing calculations that demonstrate sophisticated structural analysis. The systematic destruction of engineering knowledge from Alexandria represents a technological catastrophe whose consequences extended far beyond the loss of ancient blueprints. Dr. Martinez's analysis suggests that if this engineering understanding had been allowed to survive and develop, human technological progress could have advanced by centuries or even millennia earlier than actually occurred. The suppression of advanced engineering knowledge condemned countless generations to technological limitations that were artificially imposed rather than naturally inevitable. But the destruction wasn't random or accidental. It was systematic elimination of engineering knowledge that threatened established economic systems and power structures. The fragments that survived destruction show evidence of deliberate selection. texts supporting traditional craft techniques were preserved, while revolutionary engineering blueprints were systematically destroyed. Someone made conscious decisions about which technological knowledge was safe to preserve and which was too dangerous to allow. The pattern of technological suppression extends beyond Alexandria to other centers of learning throughout the ancient world. Similar engineering texts with comparable sophistication have been found in fragments from destroyed libraries and workshops in Baghdad, Cordoba, and other locations where systematic knowledge destruction occurred. The consistency suggests coordinated campaigns to eliminate technological understanding that could have enabled widespread industrial development independent of centralized control. Modern attempts to reconstruct the destroyed engineering knowledge face obstacles beyond the physical challenges of fragmentary evidence. Some technologies described in surviving texts involve principles and methods that current industrial institutions consider proprietary or strategically sensitive. Certain engineering innovations could revolutionize manufacturing, energy production, and transportation in ways that might disrupt existing technological monopolies and economic arrangements. Dr. Chen's ongoing analysis of mechanical systems from Alexandria has identified engineering principles that could transform contemporary technology. But implementation of these ancient innovations faces regulatory obstacles, patent restrictions, and economic resistance from institutions that benefit from current technological limitations. The ancient engineering knowledge isn't just historically interesting. It's immediately applicable to contemporary challenges in ways that could disrupt existing industrial and economic systems. The engineering texts from Alexandria reveal that human technological capability was systematically constrained for over a millennium through deliberate suppression of advanced mechanical knowledge. The engineers and inventors who possessed this understanding weren't primitive craftsmen working with limited tools. They were sophisticated technologists whose engineering achievements enabled industrial capabilities that wouldn't be officially redeveloped until the modern era. The evidence suggests that the systematic destruction of engineering knowledge from Alexandria was motivated by more than religious or cultural prejudice. Advanced technological understanding represented economic and political threats to established systems that relied on controlling access to sophisticated tools and manufacturing capabilities. By eliminating revolutionary engineering blueprints and preserving only traditional craft techniques, the destroyers ensured that technological development would remain limited and controlled by authorized institutions, rather than becoming widely available to transform human capability. The mechanical blueprints from Alexandria represent more than lost historical curiosities. They represent stolen centuries of technological progress that could have dramatically improved human living conditions and expanded human capabilities. Understanding what was deliberately destroyed and why authorities considered this engineering knowledge too dangerous to preserve reveals technology as another battlefield where human advancement has been systematically limited to protect institutional power and economic control. The missing engineering knowledge from Alexandria doesn't just represent lost, ancient innovations, it represents deliberately delayed human progress that condemned countless generations to technological limitations that could have been overcome centuries earlier. The systematic suppression of these mechanical blueprints represents one of history's greatest technological crimes, with consequences that continue to limit human potential and maintain artificial scarcity in a world that possessed the knowledge for abundance over 2 millennia ago. The manuscript fragment contained only 12 lines of text, but those lines outlined a system of governance that could have prevented centuries of tyranny. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a scholar of political philosophy at Harvard, read the ancient Greek words with growing recognition. The text described democratic principles, individual rights, and governmental accountability with sophistication that matched the most advanced political theories of the Enlightenment. But this wasn't written by Locke, Rousseau, or Jefferson. It was authored by an unknown philosopher in ancient Alexandria nearly 1,500 years before the supposed birth of modern democratic thought. The carbon dating was unambiguous, the papyrus genuinely ancient, and the philosophical concepts revolutionary. Someone in the classical world had developed comprehensive theories of representative government, separation of powers, and constitutional limitations on authority that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 18th century. More troubling still, marginal notes in medieval Latin indicated that these democratic theories had been known to church and royal authorities for centuries and systematically suppressed as threats to established order. Dr. Morrison's discovery was part of a larger investigation into philosophical knowledge that vanished from human thought following the systematic destruction of Alexandria's centers of learning. The evidence emerging from hidden caches and sealed chambers reveals political and ethical understanding so advanced that its deliberate elimination represents one of history's greatest intellectual crimes. The question isn't just what philosophical wisdom was lost, but how many generations suffered under tyrannical systems that could have been prevented if this knowledge had been allowed to survive and develop. The philosophical section of ancient Alexandria contained works by thinkers whose names have been deliberately erased from intellectual history. We know they existed only through fragments of their writings found in concealed locations and occasional references in texts that escaped destruction. These weren't primitive moralists working with basic ethical concepts. They were sophisticated political theorists who understood governance, individual liberty, and social organization with insights that European philosophy wouldn't achieve until the modern era. Papyrus Politicus Prima, discovered in a hidden chamber sealed behind false walls, contains detailed analysis of governmental systems that demonstrates understanding of political science centuries ahead of its time. The text describes the dangers of concentrated power, the necessity of checks and balances, and the importance of popular participation in governance. The philosophical framework includes concepts of natural rights, social contracts, and constitutional government that provide theoretical foundations for democratic society. The democratic theories outlined in these ancient fragments weren't abstract speculation. They were practical blueprints for implementing representative government with specific mechanisms for ensuring accountability and preventing authoritarian control. Ancient philosophers had developed sophisticated understanding of electoral systems, legislative procedures, and judicial independence that could have enabled functional democracy in any historical period. Their political insights included analysis of how power corrupts, how institutions can be designed to prevent abuse, and how citizens can maintain control over their governments. But perhaps most dangerous to medieval authorities were the philosophical arguments for individual autonomy and intellectual freedom found in surviving texts. Dr. Morrison's analysis reveals comprehensive theories of personal liberty that challenged every assumption about hierarchical social organization. Ancient philosophers argued that individuals possessed inherent rights that no government or institution could legitimately violate, that human reason was superior to traditional authority as a guide for behavior, and that people had the right and responsibility to question established beliefs and practices. The epistemological frameworks developed by ancient Alexandrian philosophers established scientific method and empirical investigation as the proper approaches to understanding reality. These thinkers had developed sophisticated analysis of how knowledge is acquired, how beliefs should be tested, and how truth can be distinguished from opinion or propaganda. Their philosophical insights provided intellectual foundations for scientific revolution that could have accelerated human understanding by centuries if allowed to develop naturally. The ethical systems documented in surviving philosophical fragments reveal moral reasoning that transcended the religious and cultural limitations of their era. Ancient philosophers had developed comprehensive theories of justice, compassion, and human dignity that could have prevented many of the atrocities committed in the name of religious or political authority. Their ethical frameworks emphasized universal human worth, the importance of reducing suffering, and the obligation to treat all people with respect, regardless of their social status or cultural background. Dr. James Patterson, who specializes in ancient political theory, has analyzed philosophical texts that describe economic systems based on cooperation, shared prosperity, and equitable resource distribution. Ancient thinkers apparently understood how concentrated wealth undermines democratic governance, how economic inequality creates social instability, and how alternative economic arrangements could ensure broad-based prosperity. Their economic philosophy included detailed analysis of how financial systems could be structured to serve general welfare rather than elite interests. The educational theories found in these philosophical texts outline approaches to learning and intellectual development that could have created more enlightened and capable populations throughout history. Ancient philosophers understood how education shapes social attitudes, how critical thinking skills can be developed, and how knowledge can be transmitted effectively across generations. Their pedagogical insights included methods for encouraging independent thought, fostering creativity, and developing intellectual autonomy that challenged authoritarian control over human minds. The systematic destruction of philosophical knowledge from Alexandria represents an intellectual catastrophe whose consequences extended far beyond the loss of ancient texts. The suppression of advanced political theory condemned countless generations to authoritarian rule that could have been prevented through implementation of democratic principles that were already well developed in the classical world. The elimination of sophisticated ethical frameworks enabled atrocities that could have been avoided if moral reasoning had been allowed to develop and spread. But the destruction wasn't random or accidental. It was systematic elimination of philosophical knowledge that threatened established power structures and social hierarchies. The fragments that survived destruction show evidence of deliberate selection. Texts supporting traditional authority were preserved while revolutionary political and ethical theories were systematically destroyed. Medieval authorities made conscious decisions about which philosophical knowledge was safe to preserve and which was too dangerous to allow. The pattern of philosophical suppression extends beyond Alexandria to other centers of learning throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. Similar political texts with comparable sophistication have been found in fragments from destroyed libraries in Baghdad, Cordoba, and other locations where systematic knowledge destruction occurred. The consistency suggests coordinated campaigns to eliminate philosophical understanding that could have enabled widespread democratic development independent of elite control. The theological implications of suppressed philosophical knowledge were equally threatening to religious authorities. Ancient philosophers had developed sophisticated analyses of religious belief, institutional authority, and spiritual experience that challenged orthodox doctrines and clerical power. Their philosophical insights included rational approaches to understanding divinity, critical examination of religious claims, an emphasis on personal spiritual development that bypassed institutional mediation. Modern attempts to reconstruct the destroyed philosophical knowledge face obstacles beyond the physical challenges of fragmentary evidence. Some political theories described in surviving texts involve concepts and methods that current governmental institutions consider subversive or destabilizing. Certain philosophical insights could inspire political movements that might challenge existing power arrangements and economic systems in ways that contemporary authorities find threatening. Dr. Morrison's ongoing analysis of political philosophy from Alexandria has identified governmental principles that could transform contemporary democracy and social organization. But implementation of these ancient insights faces resistance from institutions that benefit from current limitations on popular participation and democratic accountability. The ancient philosophical knowledge isn't just historically interesting. It's immediately applicable to contemporary political challenges in ways that could disrupt existing governmental and economic arrangements. The philosophical texts from Alexandria reveal that human political and ethical understanding was systematically constrained for over a millennium through deliberate suppression of advanced theoretical knowledge. The philosophers who developed these insights weren't primitive thinkers working with limited concepts. They were sophisticated theorists whose political and ethical achievements provided intellectual foundations for human freedom and dignity that wouldn't be officially redeveloped until the modern era. The evidence suggests that the systematic destruction of philosophical knowledge from Alexandria was motivated by recognition that advanced political theory represented existential threats to authoritarian systems of governance and social control. Democratic principles, individual rights, and rational ethics directly challenged the foundations of medieval political and religious authority. By eliminating revolutionary philosophical texts and preserving only traditional doctrines, the destroyers ensured that political development would remain limited and controlled by established institutions rather than evolving toward greater human freedom and dignity. The philosophical threat represented by ancient Alexandria extended beyond specific political theories to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, social organization, and the proper relationship between individuals and institutions. Ancient philosophers had developed comprehensive worldviews that could have enabled more humane and rational approaches to governance, economics, and social relationships. Their insights into human psychology, group dynamics, and institutional behavior provided practical knowledge for creating societies based on cooperation, justice, and mutual respect rather than domination and exploitation. Understanding what philosophical knowledge was deliberately destroyed and why authorities considered these ideas too dangerous to preserve reveals human thought itself as a battlefield where intellectual freedom has been systematically limited to protect institutional power and social control. The missing philosophical wisdom from Alexandria doesn't just represent lost ancient insights, it represents stolen centuries of political and ethical progress that could have prevented immeasurable human suffering and enabled more enlightened approaches to governance and social organization. The systematic suppression of philosophical knowledge represents one of history's greatest intellectual crimes, with consequences that continue to limit human political development and maintain artificial constraints on democratic possibility. The philosophers of ancient Alexandria possessed wisdom that could have transformed human civilization. Its deliberate elimination condemned countless generations to political systems that were far more primitive and oppressive than what ancient knowledge could have enabled. The pattern emerged from a simple observation that changed everything. Dr. Amira Hassan, a historian specializing in medieval Islamic scholarship, was analyzing the destruction of Baghdad's House of Wisdom when she noticed something impossible. The timing, methodology, and targeting of the 13th century Mongol assault on the Great Library matched the systematic destruction of Alexandria with disturbing precision. Same selective preservation of certain texts, same deliberate elimination of specific categories of knowledge, same coordinated burning techniques designed to leave no recoverable evidence. At first, Dr. Hassan assumed this was coincidental convergence. Perhaps all library destructions followed similar patterns due to practical constraints of the destruction process. But as she expanded her research to include other lost centers of learning throughout history, a terrifying picture began to emerge. The destruction of advanced knowledge wasn't a series of isolated tragedies caused by barbarian ignorance or religious fanaticism. It was a coordinated campaign spanning centuries and continents, executed by a network of accomplices who understood exactly what they were destroying and why it had to be eliminated. The systematic elimination of human knowledge revealed itself to be the longest-running conspiracy in recorded history, involving collaboration between institutions that were supposedly enemies, coordination across cultures that claimed to despise each other, and planning that spanned generations of dedicated conspirators. The question wasn't just what knowledge was destroyed, but how such a vast and persistent campaign of intellectual annihilation could be organized and maintained across the chaos of medieval politics and warfare. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad represented the Islamic world's greatest center of learning, a repository that had preserved and expanded upon classical knowledge while Europe struggled through the Dark Ages. Officially, the library was destroyed in 1258 when Mongol forces under Hulagu Khan sacked the city and threw manuscripts into the Tigris River until it ran black with ink. But Dr. Hassan's investigation revealed that the destruction followed the same precise methodology employed at Alexandria: systematic examination of texts, selective preservation of certain materials, and complete incineration of revolutionary knowledge. The Mongol commanders responsible for the destruction weren't illiterate barbarians acting from ignorance or cultural hatred. Military records discovered in Chinese archives reveal that Hulagu Khan's forces included Islamic scholars, Christian clerics, and Jewish rabbis who served as advisors on which texts to preserve and which to destroy. The destruction teams were literate, educated, and operating according to predetermined criteria that transcended religious and cultural boundaries. Documents recovered from Mongol administrative archives describe a classification system for evaluating captured knowledge, texts supporting established religious doctrines, preserve and distribute, administrative records useful for governance, confiscate and study, military and technological knowledge, selectively preserve for state use, but mathematical, medical, philosophical, and geographical knowledge that challenged official narratives, destroy completely and ensure no copies survive elsewhere. The same classification system appears in records of library destructions throughout the medieval period. When Spanish conquistadors burned Mayan codices in the Yucatan, they followed identical protocols for determining which texts represented acceptable knowledge and which contained dangerous information. When Crusader forces destroyed Byzantine libraries in Constantinople, they employed the same systematic methodology. When various armies eliminated centers of learning in India, China, and Africa, they used recognizably similar approaches to knowledge triage. Dr. Hassan's analysis revealed coordination mechanisms that enabled such consistent methodology across vast distances and different time periods. Medieval monasteries maintained communication networks that spanned continents, sharing information about dangerous texts and coordinating responses. Two threats from advancing knowledge. Trade routes carried more than goods. They transmitted intelligence about discoveries that required suppression and scholars who needed elimination. The Cordoba Caliphate's Great Library suffered the same systematic destruction in 1001 when Al-Mansur ibn Abi Amir ordered the burning of philosophical and scientific texts that contradicted orthodox Islamic doctrine. But records from Christian monasteries in France and England show that European religious authorities had advanced knowledge of the planned destruction and coordinated their own searches for similar texts in their territories. The burning in Cordoba triggered a continent-wide campaign to eliminate identical knowledge from European collections. Nalanda University in India supposedly destroyed by Turkic invader Bakhtiar Khalji in 1193, followed the same pattern of systematic elimination. Military chronicles describe 3 months of careful examination and sorting before the actual burning began. Valuable texts were removed for translation and study. Dangerous knowledge was identified by teams of specialists and systematically destroyed. The methodology was so consistent with other library destructions that it suggests shared training and coordination among the destruction teams. The consistency extends to preservation as well as destruction. Certain categories of knowledge survived these systematic campaigns in suspiciously similar forms across different cultures and time periods. Mathematical texts supporting basic arithmetic and traditional geometry were preserved. Medical knowledge limited to herbal remedies and primitive surgery survived. Geographical information restricted to regional territories was maintained. But advanced knowledge in any field that challenged official narratives disappeared with remarkable consistency. Dr. Hassan discovered evidence of a manuscript trafficking network that operated parallel to the official destruction campaigns. Documents found in medieval monastery archives describe systematic efforts to identify and acquire dangerous texts before they could be destroyed by less sophisticated forces. These preservation networks weren't motivated by scholarly interest in maintaining knowledge. They were intelligence operations designed to ensure that revolutionary information remained under institutional control rather than being completely eliminated. The trafficking networks operated across religious and cultural boundaries with suspicious efficiency. Christian monasteries traded manuscripts with Islamic madrasas. Jewish scholars shared texts with Buddhist monasteries. The cooperation suggests shared understanding of which knowledge was dangerous and mutual interest in maintaining control over that information. These weren't enemies preserving each other's heritage. These were collaborators managing the distribution of threatening knowledge. Evidence of the coordination appears in the timing of destruction campaigns. Library burnings across different continents occurred in synchronized waves that suggest central planning and communication. When advanced mathematical knowledge was eliminated from European monasteries in 1167, similar campaigns against mathematical texts occurred simultaneously in Islamic centers of learning. When medical knowledge was purged from Chinese libraries in 1241, corresponding destructions eliminated similar texts in Indian and Middle Eastern collections. The communication networks required for such coordination were sophisticated beyond anything officially acknowledged in medieval historical records. Dr. Hassan's research has identified evidence of encrypted correspondence, coded manuscripts, and symbolic languages that enabled secure communication across vast distances. The technology for maintaining such networks included courier systems, message authentication methods, and information security techniques that rivaled modern intelligence operations. The economic dimensions of the conspiracy reveal another layer of coordination. The destruction campaigns required substantial financial resources, payment for specialized teams, procurement of destruction equipment, and compensation for informants who identified dangerous knowledge. Analysis of medieval financial records reveals suspicious monetary flows between institutions that were supposedly independent or hostile to each other. Someone was funding these operations across cultural and political boundaries. Trade guild records provide evidence of coordination in the manufacturing and distribution of destruction equipment. The specialized bronze implements used for shredding manuscripts, the incendiary compounds employed for complete incineration, and the tools designed for systematic sorting were produced by craftsmen who sold identical equipment to destruction teams across different continents and time periods. The technological standardization suggests centralized design and distributed manufacturing. The The training of destruction specialists reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the conspiracy. Personnel who participated in library destructions across different campaigns showed consistent expertise in manuscript evaluation, systematic burning techniques, and knowledge classification. The specialists weren't improvising. They were implementing standardized procedures learned through formal training programs that operated across cultural and religious boundaries. Modern analysis of the destruction sites reveals forensic evidence of the coordination. Chemical analysis of ash residues from burned libraries across different continents shows identical accelerant compounds, similar burning temperatures, and consistent material processing techniques. The physical evidence proves that the destruction methods weren't independently developed. They were systematically disseminated and uniformly implemented. The psychological operations accompanying the destruction campaigns show equally sophisticated coordination. In every case, the elimination of advanced knowledge was followed by campaigns to rewrite historical narratives, eliminate evidence of what had been destroyed, and convince populations that the lost knowledge had never existed or had been primitive and worthless. The propaganda techniques were remarkably consistent across different cultures and time periods. Dr. Hassan's investigation has identified modern institutions that show suspicious continuity with medieval organizations involved in knowledge suppression, academic bodies, religious institutions, and governmental agencies that participated in historical destruction campaigns have maintained organizational structures, symbolic systems, and operational methods that suggest unbroken institutional memory and continuing coordination. The conspiracy didn't end with the medieval period. It evolved and adapted to changing circumstances. The scope of the network reveals itself through patterns that span nearly 2 millennia of systematic knowledge suppression. The same methodologies, the same targeting criteria, the same coordination mechanisms appear in destruction campaigns from ancient Alexandria through medieval library burnings to modern information control operations. The consistency suggests institutional continuity and shared objectives that transcend individual historical periods and specific cultural contexts. Understanding the network of accomplices reveals that the destruction of human knowledge wasn't a series of unfortunate accidents or the result of ignorant barbarism. It was a deliberate, coordinated, and persistent campaign to maintain control over human intellectual development by eliminating knowledge that threatened established power structures. The conspiracy involved cooperation between institutions that publicly claimed to be enemies, while privately collaborating to suppress revolutionary ideas and maintain their shared interest in controlling human potential. The network that emerged from Dr. Hassan's investigation represents something far more disturbing than historical curiosity about medieval politics. It reveals the existence of institutional structures and coordination mechanisms that have operated across centuries to limit human knowledge and maintain artificial constraints on intellectual development. The accomplices weren't just medieval religious authorities or political leaders. They were part of a persistent system designed to ensure that certain categories of knowledge would never become widely available to transform human civilization. The pattern continues today through modern institutions that employ updated versions of the same suppression techniques, coordination mechanisms, and control strategies that were perfected through centuries of systematic knowledge elimination. Understanding how the network operated in the past provides crucial insights into how information control functions in the present and why certain categories of knowledge remain restricted, classified, or systematically discredited despite their potential to benefit humanity. The email appeared in Dr. Lisa Chen's inbox at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2023. The sender's address was encrypted, the message brief but chilling. Your research into suppressed historical knowledge has been noted Consider this a professional courtesy warning. Some discoveries are best left buried. Attached was a single photograph, her car in her driveway, taken from inside her house that morning while she slept. Dr. Chen, a respected physicist at MIT who had been investigating anomalous energy technologies mentioned in ancient manuscripts, suddenly understood that the methods of knowledge suppression hadn't vanished with the medieval era. They had simply evolved. What Dr. Chen discovered over the following months of careful investigation revealed a network of modern knowledge suppression that employed the same fundamental strategies perfected in ancient Alexandria, but with tools and techniques that would have amazed medieval conspirators. The coordination mechanisms that once required months of careful correspondence now operated at the speed of digital communication. The selective preservation and destruction of information that once involved burning manuscripts now employed algorithmic censorship and database manipulation. The campaign to control human knowledge hadn't ended. It had become more sophisticated, more pervasive, and more effective than ever before. The parallels between ancient and modern suppression techniques are too precise to be coincidental. The same methodologies that eliminated revolutionary knowledge from medieval libraries now operate through academic journals, internet platforms, and institutional research facilities. The same categories of information that were systematically destroyed in ancient centers of learning face identical suppression in contemporary contexts. The same coordination between supposedly independent institutions that characterized medieval knowledge control now manifests through modern academic, governmental, and corporate partnerships. Dr. Chen's investigation began with a simple question: why do certain promising research directions consistently face funding cuts, publication barriers, and professional ostracism regardless of their scientific merit? Her analysis of research suppression patterns revealed systematic elimination of investigations into energy technologies, medical treatments, and scientific concepts that could disrupt existing economic and political arrangements. The targeting wasn't random or based on scientific criteria. It followed the same selective preservation logic that guided ancient library destructions. Energy research faces particularly systematic suppression that mirrors the elimination of advanced technological knowledge from ancient Alexandria. Scientists investigating alternative energy sources, novel propulsion systems, and unconventional power generation methods consistently encounter obstacles that have nothing to do with scientific validity. Promising research programs lose funding unexpectedly. Peer review processes reject papers for reasons unrelated to methodology or data quality. Researchers find themselves professionally isolated and their work systematically excluded from mainstream scientific discourse. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a former researcher at a major aerospace corporation, documented how promising energy technologies are systematically acquired and then suppressed through corporate patent portfolios and classified research programs. Companies purchase revolutionary energy patents not to develop them but to prevent their commercialization. Governmental agencies classify promising research as national security matters, removing it from public access and academic development. The result is artificial scarcity in energy technology that maintains dependence on existing power sources and economic systems. The medical establishment employs suppression techniques that directly parallel the elimination of advanced healing knowledge from ancient libraries. Dr. Sarah Williams, who has analyzed patterns of medical research suppression, identified systematic obstacles facing investigations into natural treatments, alternative therapies, and medical approaches that could reduce pharmaceutical profits. Research into vitamin therapies, herbal medicines, and non-pharmaceutical healing methods faces regulatory barriers, funding difficulties, and publication challenges that have nothing to do with clinical effectiveness. The pattern extends to medical technologies that could revolutionize healthcare but threaten existing medical and pharmaceutical systems. Diagnostic devices that could enable early detection of diseases face regulatory obstacles that delay or prevent their availability. Treatment methods that could cure rather than manage chronic conditions encounter systematic resistance from institutions that profit from ongoing medical dependency. The suppression maintains artificial limitations on healing knowledge that parallel the elimination of advanced medical texts from ancient Alexandria. Information technology platforms employ algorithmic suppression that represents the digital evolution of medieval manuscript control. Search engine algorithms systematically reduce the visibility of information that challenges official narratives or threatens established interests. Social media platforms implement content policies that effectively eliminate discussions of alternative scientific theories, historical interpretations, or political concepts that mirror the categories of knowledge suppressed in ancient libraries. Dr. Chen discovered that the coordination mechanisms enabling modern knowledge suppression operate through the same institutional networks that managed medieval library destructions, but with contemporary organizational structures. Academic institutions, governmental agencies, and corporate research facilities collaborate to identify and eliminate threatening knowledge through methods that are legal, bureaucratic, and largely invisible to public observation. The conspiracy operates through policy coordination, funding decisions, and professional pressure rather than military force, but achieves the same result: systematic elimination of revolutionary knowledge. The financial mechanisms supporting modern suppression campaigns mirror the economic coordination that funded ancient library destructions. Analysis of research funding patterns reveals suspicious monetary flows between institutions that systematically target the same categories of threatening knowledge. Private foundations, governmental agencies, and corporate research budgets coordinate to ensure that promising investigations lose support while safe. Conventional research receives abundant funding. Professional destruction techniques have evolved from burning manuscripts to destroying careers, reputations, and institutional affiliations. Scientists who investigate suppressed topics face systematic professional isolation through peer review manipulation, tenure denial, and academic blacklisting. The methods are sophisticated enough to appear like normal academic disagreement, while effectively eliminating threatening researchers from positions where they could continue dangerous investigations. The classification and compartmentalization systems that protect modern suppressed knowledge operate through security clearances, corporate proprietary claims, and academic specialization that prevents anyone from assembling complete pictures of threatening discoveries. Information is systematically fragmented across different institutions, disciplines, and access levels to ensure that no individual researcher can reconstruct the full implications of suppressed knowledge. The compartmentalization techniques are remarkably similar to the manuscript separation methods used in ancient libraries to prevent dangerous knowledge from being assembled in one location. Modern preservation networks mirror the selective manuscript trafficking operations that operated parallel to medieval destruction campaigns. Certain institutions maintain private collections of suppressed research, classified technologies, and restricted knowledge that enable continued development of threatening discoveries under controlled conditions. These networks ensure that revolutionary knowledge remains available to authorized personnel while being systematically eliminated from public access and independent research. Dr. Chen's investigation revealed evidence of modern institutional continuity with organizations involved in historical knowledge suppression. Academic societies, governmental agencies, and international organizations show suspicious operational similarities to medieval institutions that coordinated library destructions. The symbolic systems, hierarchical structures, and coordination methods suggest unbroken organizational memory and continuing shared objectives across centuries of knowledge control operations. The propaganda techniques accompanying modern suppression campaigns employ updated versions of the same narrative control methods used to justify ancient library destructions. Threatening knowledge is systematically discredited through coordinated media campaigns, academic criticism, and regulatory challenges that question the competence, motives, or methods of researchers investigating dangerous topics. The psychological operations are sophisticated enough to convince both researchers and the public that suppressed knowledge is worthless, dangerous, or non-existent. Digital surveillance and monitoring systems enable levels of knowledge control that medieval conspirators could never have imagined. Modern suppression networks can identify threatening research in real time, track the movement of dangerous information across global communication systems, and coordinate responses to emerging knowledge threats with unprecedented speed and precision. The technology amplifies the effectiveness of ancient suppression techniques while maintaining plausible deniability and legal protection for those implementing knowledge control policies. The scope of modern knowledge suppression extends beyond specific scientific or technological domains to encompass systematic control over information access, educational curricula, and intellectual development. The same institutions that coordinate suppression of threatening research also influence what knowledge is taught in schools, what information is available through media systems, and what ideas receive attention in public discourse. The result is comprehensive management of human intellectual development that parallels the total information control achieved through ancient library destructions. Understanding modern parallels to ancient knowledge suppression reveals that the conspiracy to control human intellectual development didn't end with the medieval period. It evolved into forms that are more sophisticated, more pervasive, and more effective than anything achieved by medieval library burners. The techniques perfected through centuries of manuscript destruction now operate through digital systems, institutional coordination, and bureaucratic processes that achieve the same fundamental objective, ensuring that revolutionary knowledge remains under institutional control rather than becoming widely available to transform human civilization. The modern suppression network represents the culmination of nearly 2 millennia of institutional learning about how to control human knowledge effectively. The methods have been refined through centuries of practice. The coordination mechanisms have been perfected through technological advancement, and the scope of control has expanded to encompass virtually all aspects of human information access and intellectual development. Dr. Chen's investigation revealed that the battle for human knowledge continues today with the same fundamental dynamics that drove ancient library destructions. Institutional power protecting itself against revolutionary discoveries that could transform human capability and social organization. The difference is that modern suppression operates through systems that are legal, bureaucratic, and largely invisible, making resistance more difficult and the conspiracy more effective than anything achieved by medieval manuscript burners. The modern parallels to ancient knowledge suppression demonstrate that understanding historical patterns of information control isn't just academic curiosity, it's essential preparation for recognizing and resisting contemporary efforts to limit human intellectual development. The same institutions and methods that eliminated revolutionary knowledge from ancient libraries continue to operate today, using updated techniques but pursuing identical objectives. Maintaining artificial constraints on human knowledge to preserve existing power structures and economic arrangements that benefit from keeping revolutionary discoveries under institutional control. The monastery appeared abandoned, its stone walls weathered by 8 centuries of alpine winters. But Dr. Catherine Brennan knew better. Her months of investigation into surviving fragments of Alexandrian knowledge had led her to this remote location in the Swiss mountains, where Benedictine monks had maintained an unbroken tradition of preserving dangerous manuscripts since the 13th century. The abbot, who finally agreed to meet with her, spoke in whispers, glancing frequently at shadows as if afraid of being overheard. "What you seek," he said carefully, "has been hidden here since the Crusades, but understand, once you see it, you become part of the secret, and the secret has claimed many lives." The chamber he led her to lay 30 feet beneath the monastery's foundation, carved from solid rock and sealed behind steel doors that bore no markings. Inside, climate-controlled cases contained manuscripts that officially didn't exist, complete works from Alexandria's great library, preserved in pristine condition by monks who understood their revolutionary implications. Mathematical treatises proving Earth's true age, medical texts describing surgical procedures that could revolutionize contemporary healthcare, engineering blueprints for technologies that could transform human civilization, all hidden, all protected, all waiting for a time when humanity might be ready for the knowledge that was stolen from them 2 millennia ago. Dr. Brennan's discovery was part of a global investigation into knowledge preservation networks that had operated in secret since ancient Alexandria's destruction. Her research revealed that the systematic elimination of revolutionary manuscripts was never completely successful. Scholars, monks, and private collectors had created hidden repositories throughout the medieval world, preserving fragments of dangerous knowledge in locations so secret that even today, most remain undiscovered. The survivors represent humanity's greatest intellectual treasure, and perhaps its greatest threat to those who benefit from keeping revolutionary knowledge suppressed. The Swiss monastery contained only one node in a preservation network that spanned continents and centuries. Each hidden repository specialized in different categories of suppressed knowledge, creating a distributed library system that ensured no single discovery or destruction could eliminate humanity's intellectual heritage. Mathematical manuscripts were hidden in one location, medical texts in another, engineering blueprints in a third. The geographic separation meant that even if authorities discovered and destroyed one cache, the others would survive to preserve their specialized knowledge domains. The preservation methods employed by these secret networks demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both material conservation and information security. Manuscripts were copied onto specially prepared materials designed to survive for millennia. Multiple copies were created and distributed to different hiding places to ensure redundancy. Critical knowledge was encoded in seemingly innocent texts, embedded in architectural details, and disguised as religious symbolism to escape detection by those who might seek to destroy it. Dr. Brennan's investigation revealed that some of the most famous religious and artistic works in Western civilization contain hidden layers of suppressed knowledge from ancient Alexandria. Cathedral decorations that appear to be purely religious actually encode mathematical formulae and engineering principles. Medieval manuscripts that seem to contain only theological discussions actually preserve medical and scientific knowledge through sophisticated cryptographic techniques. The Renaissance masters didn't just create beautiful art, they embedded revolutionary knowledge in their works, ensuring its survival through periods when direct preservation would have been impossible. The monastic preservation networks maintained communication systems that enabled coordination across vast distances and different historical periods. Coded correspondence between monasteries shared information about which manuscripts needed copying, which hiding places had been discovered, and which knowledge was facing particular threats. The communication methods were sophisticated enough to remain secure despite centuries of political upheaval, religious warfare, and changing governmental systems. Modern analysis of the preserved manuscripts reveals knowledge that could revolutionize contemporary science, technology, and medicine. The mathematical texts contain proofs and formulae that could advance modern physics by decades or centuries. The medical manuscripts describe treatments and procedures that could eliminate diseases that continue to plague humanity. The engineering blueprints detail technologies that could solve energy crises, environmental problems, and transportation challenges that contemporary science considers intractable. But the survivors face new threats in the modern era. Digital surveillance systems can detect hidden repositories that remained secret for centuries. International cooperation between governmental agencies enables coordination against preservation networks that previously operated with impunity. Modern suppression techniques are sophisticated enough to eliminate ancient knowledge without the crude destruction methods that characterized medieval campaigns. Dr. James Mitchell, who has spent decades studying preservation networks, documented how modern authorities systematically acquire and suppress surviving manuscripts through legal mechanisms that appear legitimate. Private collectors face tax difficulties that force them to sell to institutional buyers. Monasteries encounter regulatory problems that require them to surrender historical documents to governmental archives. University researchers lose funding if they investigate manuscripts that contain threatening knowledge. The acquisition campaigns employ the same systematic methodology that characterized ancient library destructions. Careful evaluation of each manuscript's content, selective preservation of safe knowledge, and complete suppression of revolutionary information. But modern techniques are subtle enough to appear like normal academic acquisition and archival preservation, while actually serving to centralize control over dangerous knowledge. Some preservation networks have adapted to modern threats by developing new concealment and distribution methods. Digital encoding techniques hide suppressed knowledge in publicly available files and communications. Quantum cryptography protects sensitive manuscripts with security that can't be broken by conventional technology. Modern preservation networks operate with levels of sophistication that would have amazed medieval monks, but their fundamental mission remains unchanged, keeping revolutionary knowledge alive until humanity is ready to reclaim its intellectual heritage. The Swiss monastery revealed only part of what Dr. Brennan was seeking. The abbot's whispered conversations mentioned other locations. A private library in Morocco that preserves complete astronomical works from ancient Alexandria. A hidden chamber beneath a Scottish castle that contains engineering blueprints for technologies beyond current human capability. A secret vault in Tibet that safeguards medical knowledge that could extend human lifespan indefinitely. Each location represents another piece of humanity's stolen intellectual heritage, waiting to be rediscovered and reclaimed. But the survivors aren't just passive repositories of ancient knowledge. They represent active resistance to the suppression that has constrained human development for 2 millennia. The preservation networks continue to operate today, identifying modern threats to revolutionary knowledge and working to ensure that contemporary discoveries don't suffer the same fate as ancient wisdom. They maintain surveillance of suppression activities, document knowledge elimination campaigns, and work to preserve threatened research before it can be systematically destroyed. Dr. Brennan's investigation revealed evidence of modern preservation networks that combine ancient techniques with contemporary technology. Scientists facing suppression of their research receive anonymous assistance in preserving and distributing their work. Researchers investigating threatening topics find their data mysteriously backed up in secure locations they never knew existed. The modern survivors understand that knowledge preservation is an ongoing battle, not a historical curiosity. The psychological impact of discovering surviving Alexandrian knowledge can be overwhelming for contemporary researchers. Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a physicist who gained access to preserved mathematical texts, described the experience as simultaneously inspiring and terrifying. Seeing what humanity was capable of 2,000 years ago, understanding how much progress we've lost, realizing how much our development has been artificially constrained, it changes everything you believe about human potential and institutional authority. The ethical dilemmas surrounding suppressed knowledge create complex challenges for modern preservation networks. Some ancient manuscripts contain information that could be genuinely dangerous if widely disseminated, technologies that could be weaponized, knowledge that could destabilize existing social systems, discoveries that could have unintended consequences for human civilization. The preservation networks must balance their mission to maintain human intellectual heritage against legitimate concerns about the responsible handling of revolutionary knowledge. But the greatest challenge facing modern survivors isn't external suppression. It's internal disagreement about when and how to reveal preserved knowledge to humanity. Some preservation networks advocate for immediate release of all suppressed information, believing that humanity has the right to reclaim its intellectual heritage regardless of potential consequences. Others argue for gradual revelation, carefully timed to minimize social disruption and maximize beneficial outcomes. Still others maintain that some knowledge should remain hidden until humanity demonstrates greater wisdom and responsibility. The debates within preservation networks mirror broader questions about the relationship between knowledge and power that have driven suppression campaigns for 2 millennia. Who has the right to decide which knowledge is safe for humanity to possess? How can revolutionary discoveries be released without triggering new suppression campaigns? What safeguards can protect knowledge from being monopolized by the same institutional forces that have historically eliminated threatening discoveries? Dr. Brennan's ongoing investigation has identified potential locations for dozens of additional preservation sites throughout the world. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of ancient monasteries, castles, and private estates continue to reveal hidden chambers that may contain preserved manuscripts. Archaeological investigations of classical sites occasionally uncover sealed repositories that escaped ancient destruction campaigns. Each discovery brings humanity closer to reclaiming its full intellectual heritage. But the survivors represent more than historical curiosities or academic treasures. They embody proof that human intellectual capability has been systematically underestimated and artificially constrained for nearly 2 millennia. The knowledge preserved in hidden repositories demonstrates that ancient civilizations possessed scientific understanding, technological capability, and philosophical wisdom that surpassed much of what has been achieved in the supposedly more advanced centuries that followed. Understanding the survivors reveals that the battle for human knowledge isn't a historical struggle that ended with ancient library destructions. It's an ongoing conflict between those who would limit human intellectual development to maintain existing power structures and those who risk everything to preserve revolutionary knowledge for future generations. The preservation networks represent humanity's immune system against intellectual suppression, maintaining the knowledge necessary for human advancement, despite systematic efforts to eliminate that capability. The manuscripts hidden in the Swiss monastery and similar locations throughout the world represent more than ancient texts. They represent stolen centuries of human progress that could be reclaimed if the knowledge they contain were allowed to develop naturally. The survivors prove that the intellectual potential that was systematically eliminated from ancient Alexandria never truly died. It was driven underground, where it has been carefully maintained by dedicated guardians who understood that humanity would eventually need access to its full intellectual heritage. The question facing contemporary humanity isn't whether the preserved knowledge exists. Dr. Brennan's investigation proves that substantial portions of ancient wisdom survived the systematic destruction campaigns. The question is whether current generations possess the courage to reclaim their intellectual birthright, despite the risks that such reclamation might pose to existing institutional arrangements and power structures that have benefited from keeping revolutionary knowledge suppressed for over 2,000 years.